Right. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, Rebecca.
How's it going in Bend, Oregon?
It's great. And it's a delight to spend some time with you and be in conversation about important things.
Yeah, same. I'm looking forward to this conversation because you have such a breadth of knowledge and experience, definitely working with women and also working with women in the context of leadership.
Yeah.
So you run InsideOut Incubator, which runs leadership programs for women who work in male-dominated industries. So we're talking about mostly tech. What other industries would you consider male-dominated that you help women out in?
Finance and legal are two other big industries.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of industries that like have that tech overlap, like fintech, health tech.
Right.
But really
Yeah.
more recently, we've expanded outside of just tech to people who work in like the straight finance world and some who work in legal purely.
Yeah, cool. And how many women are in your programs? Do you have a number on that?
So we've been in business for about 5 years. Our cohorts tend to be between 20 and 30 women, both when we run it inside of an organization and when we run it to the public. I think we probably have 280 like alumni who have joined a longer form program. And I don't know, maybe 20,000 women who have been exposed to our work in some way, shape, or form.
So cool. Yeah. And you also do, I love that you've got this how to handle it, the free monthly call for dealing with any professional challenge. That is super awesome. I wish I had had that when I was, figuring my shit out. I mean, I'm still figuring my shit out, but I mean, it seems like a really juicy kind of forum for women to come and share what's going on for them. I mean, what would you say women get the most out of from that experience?
It's interesting. It's a newer series. We just had our second call yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And so it's fresh in my mind, but it's just like the ability to bring something that you're trying to handle into a group of people who can resonate with your experience. And I think the most fun thing that we play with in those calls, or something that we're like leaning more into, is we actually start by getting women in conversation about what they're proud of, what they handled.
Say that again?
Like there's a challenge that you have that you're trying to handle. And we actually start off the calls by inviting women into conversation around things that they've already handled, that they're proud of how they handled it in some way.
Right. So I don't know if this is typical, but in the coaching world, it seems typical to start with a win and then go on the difficult stuff. Yeah.
It is. And I feel like one of the things about women working in traditional fields is there's just a really heavy focus on what to improve, what to optimize, what to make more efficient, what to build. Like there's just this like such a forward facing mentality, which is delightful and it serves a huge purpose. And women are inundated with like, improve this, do this, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, if we're inundated with that, let's just take a breath and acknowledge like what's actually working here.
Yeah. So important. Yeah. I think women function better when they can focus on the positive first and then dig deeper into, okay, well, what can we improve? It just feels natural to me that way. Great. I'm curious, and I know I'm coming off the cuff with a lot of these questions, but I was looking at your website and there's your free download, which is the 7 hidden rules that hold women back. I'm so curious about those. Can you tell me what one of those rules is?
Yeah. A big one that came up yesterday in our how to handle it call is everything is my responsibility.
Yeah.
So the deal with those rules these are themes that, just got surfaced to us from working with women for 5 years. And what they actually are is primarily conditioning that women have received as a result of working and being in very patriarchal systems about what it means to be a woman. So systemic messages have us believe that you need to be doing this, this, and this. You have to have the work life and family. Like part of a woman's value is how much she can take on without raising a stir.
Yeah.
That's kind of the systemic way that women have been valued. And so one of the ways that we take it on, include with that messaging, is really raising our hand and feeling responsible for everything. And there's no right or wrong with how much you're responsible for and how much you choose to let go of responsibility. But it's this idea of raising to women that some of our way of being in the world is actually following a playbook that was handed to us by systems that were designed to hold us back.
Yeah, for sure. I've worked with a lot of women who have a real hard time saying no to things, and they feel like there's something wrong with them if they want to, and sounds exactly like what you're talking about there.
And society reflects back that that's not an okay decision.
Yeah.
So totally. to stand in your power and to actually say that, no, it requires a certain amount of comfort that it's okay to do that. And we want to believe that that's going to come from external people saying, it's okay to say no, Rebecca, do it. And that may or may not happen. And it's certainly not the thing that's going to actually inspire you to say no. It has to come from within yourself, determining that that's actually acceptable.
So how did you get started on this path, particularly with women? I know that you've been a coach. How many years have you been a coach?
I left my corporate job in 2016. So 6 years, a little more than 6 years.
Yeah. And have you always been working with women, or has it been a blend?
I started working with women pretty early on. And kind of the imagination of InsideOut. When I first stepped into coaching, I got pretty good corporate contracts by nature of my network and what I had done historically. And I realized pretty early on, when an organization leverages development dollars, they go to people in higher ranks within organizations. So I found myself getting a view into who was in higher ranks of organizations, which was a lot of older white men, not even necessarily older, but revered white men who were in top leadership positions. And pretty early, I realized, I don't know that this is where I want to focus all of my time, energy, attention. And I had a lot of sadness that just, there's these great resources that are coaching and they're going to very specific people. Like how do we get them to women before they're up there? Or even if they never choose to go up there.
Get up there. Yeah.
Or if they choose to. Yeah.
Right. I know I've always thought it ironic that companies tend to spend more of their dollars in the upper ranks of the ladder when they could be growing people from the bottom up. It just seems a little backward to me, but anyway, what would you say is your, so we've talked about InsideOut a little bit, but before going deeper into that, because I'm super curious about the origin story of InsideOut, what would you say is the overarching arc of your career so far? Like, where did you start? How did you get here today?
I would say that I have a career that most of society tells you should be ashamed of.
Really? Okay, this is gonna be good.
I've always been like a worker person. I worked in high school. I liked to work. I like to have financial freedom from my parents. So I've been driven, but more traditional career kind of post college for me was I made a lot of my early decisions based on lifestyle. I went to undergrad at CU Boulder, and I wanted to live in a big city, and I found a job on campus recruiting, and I almost didn't care what it was. I just wanted to be in San Francisco, and that happened. And then from there, I just kind of followed my curiosity. That was a job in finance. And I learned that I had a gift for like spreadsheeting and data analytics, and I ended up doing reporting. And then I no longer wanted to commute to the South Bay, and I was like, whatever job I can get actually in the city. And I got a job at Williams-Sonoma Corporate doing database analytics. And then that was up until like the 2008, 2009 recession. And a lot of people got laid off. And people who were really senior in companies. And I just realized jobs aren't permanent.
It's such a good thing to realize, isn't it? It's like, woo, freedom, the doors to heaven open.
Yeah, it was kind of
Amazing.
like everybody I admired who was like up there got laid off, and
Yeah.
because they had higher salaries and Williams Sonoma was struggling. And I left the city at that point and really was interested in food and sustainable agriculture, and I became a farmer.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
I thought I would become a farmer, and I moved back to Boulder with that dream. And the recession was still alive, and I could not find a job.
Uh-huh.
There were just no jobs. And I took the only job that I could find at a company that I thought was like a Spanish radio station. And they turned out to be like digital advertising, which was like still very nascent as an industry. And then I followed a friend to a different company in that space in Colorado. She was like, we get to like have social hour and we have kegs in the office. And I was like, this seems more fun than what I'm doing. And I had a terrible boss. And I followed her, and that became an career in data analytics, where I ended up running product and strategic partnerships for a really booming startup. I was maybe their 80th employee, and we grew to 1,600, and we sold to Oracle.
Oh, wow.
So I ended up
Huge.
spending 6 years there. And that job brought me back to San Francisco when I was standing up a lot of our big partnerships in the Bay Area. And then I was negotiating a new job, and I had had some exposure to coaching at that point and went to training to be a better manager.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of fell in love and decided I was going to make a career.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And when was that? When was that transition?
2006. And the reason
2006.
why I
Yeah.
say that it's a career that most people would be ashamed of, I never had a job for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
Up until landing at what was a startup, where I worked for 5.5 years. I never had a long-term job. Variety is a value of mine.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of like landing in a position and consistently doing the same thing isn't energizing for me, which is can be very hard in corporate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's random. I've been in data analytics and sales and product and farming, and I've always
Yeah.
run like kind of side businesses and wedding planning and like all of these things. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of judgment on people who jump jobs, and I'm a job jumper. Running my own business is the longest I've ever done anything.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a real characteristic of a true entrepreneur, is when you keep looking like, oh, what's here? What's here? I want to see this. I want to go deeper. I mean, I'm the same way. And I think also what you're speaking to is a little bit about what we were saying before about how, oh, it's not done like that. And you can't do it like that because that's not the way, like it's this other system, this hierarchical system telling us the way it should be done. And if you don't fit in with that mold, then, be damned kind of thing. So yeah, I love hearing that you had all these different paths, because I think one of the things that I hear all the time from a lot of younger women I work with is they think that this path to success, whatever that may be, is this straight shot. And, if anybody is successful now, it's because they just did the work to get to the place. And I'm just like, God, who does that anymore? I think that's a value from maybe the 50s or something. So
I think, honestly, it was like 2 years into running. I run a one-on-one coaching business and InsideOut Incubator, but it was 2 years in where I realized, one, I've always been an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've always kind of had these side things, which like just wasn't in my frame of mind. It was just like, well, I'm making money doing something interesting. And I realized, one of a coach's greatest skills is listening, which is innate in me, and I've been trained in it. But listening is the thing that made me really good at data analytics and product development and sales and coaching. Like, the skill of listening is the thing that made me a very valuable contributor at all of those things.
Right.
And yeah, it's like, what do all of these have to do with each other? And it's like, oh, right. It's that one thing that can be in a lot of different worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a quick story about like a massive failure you've had, just to debunk once and again the idea that success is a straight shot and you've just got to work hard to get there. What comes up for you?
I mean, I think the biggest failure for me is a moment that sticks out. And I actually write about this in our work. When I first moved back to the Bay Area with my former company, you know, I had moved to San Francisco to stand up lots of different partnerships with big tech companies. And there was a point where we were running out of partnerships to stand up. And I was never someone who really thought, like, what is all of this leading up to? What is this going to mean? And our CEO was in our San Francisco office and we had a meeting together. And, you know, it was an intimidating meeting where I said, like, where do you see this going? And I had never thought of it, but I didn't want to pretend I had thought of it. And I kind of played this game of chicken with him, like waiting for him to tell me what to do. Because for a lot of your career, somebody says, oh, you're doing this, now do this. And you kind of just like follow instructions. And I wanted that to continue because that's easy. And he basically recommended that I take over a very large partnership for us and hire a team and scale that partnership, which I did do. But it's a failure because I followed directions, which wasn't energizing to me. Like I had completely denied that part of my strength and joy was that variety. And I let him kind of put me in this pointed path because I hadn't thought about it. And it's not that the whole thing was bad, but it's like, it really feels like this point in my career where it's like, that wasn't for me. And I knew it and I did it anyway.
Right. And did you do it with some modicum of success or not because you weren't fully on board with it?
By outside metrics, it's like we had the numbers and I scaled the team and we did the initiatives, but like, if that's my definition of success, yes.
Yeah.
But really my definition of success is enjoying what I'm doing. And if that's my definition of success, not really. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of depends on how you define success.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, right? Because we all talk about success, but success means something different to every person, I think. And we're not talking about that. Like what does it mean for you? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for you? So Inside Out seems like that is what you want to be doing. And I'm curious, what's the origin story of that organization, of your business?
Yeah. So I had spoke earlier about how I realized where development dollars went and didn't really want to build a career servicing those type of people. And then I had a moment with a specific coaching client who worked in the same industry as me in my former life. And part of our coaching session is he was kind of evaluating women that I knew and had worked with. And I just realized I have a vastly different perception of these women than this person is painting in this coaching session. And there was something about that where I was just like, I want to do something where women are better able to evaluate themselves independent of what people are telling them their value is. That was like the first hit. And then I got introduced to my co-founder Gina through a mutual friend. And we were just kind of in discussion. She was still working full time, but we were in discussion about what we were seeing kind of for women in corporate environments. And it started as just an experiment. Let's just play with running a weekend program in downtown San Francisco. Bringing some of these like very foundational key concepts of coaching to women in a group setting. And it was we always wanted to do it in a group so women could learn from one another and feel less alone in the experience that they were having. And we ran those weekend programs for basically up until the pandemic. And then we completely pivoted our business to be online and longer form programs.
Yeah. And it kind of exploded from there, didn't it? Because isn't it amazing? The pandemic has actually been such a gift to a lot of people. Yeah. And it seems like it has been for you too. Yeah. So your slogan is unsubscribe from conventional leadership. So tell me a little bit about what is this conventional leadership model that you talk about and why does it not work?
Yeah. It's funny. We actually, when we run one of our key programs inside organizations, we ask women to define like, what's conventional leadership for you? And it's usually like old, hierarchical, top down. But really, it's like a leadership model that you see very represented, that's very pervasive in organizations.
Mhm.
And it's primarily backed by patriarchy. Like this
Mhm.
idea, like you said it earlier, like work hard, get to the top,
Mhm.
follow
Mhm.
directions, get here. But what
Mhm.
I noticed in my own career, previous to coaching, because I had a lot of female peers, we just weren't getting to the top. And part of that was like, we're not given opportunities. And I don't want that. Like we see
Mhm.
so many women who look at the people up there and it's like, that's not the life that I want.
Mhm.
And so there's this real desire to disentangle what it looks like and what it can be from a leadership
Mhm.
perspective. And so unsubscribing from conventional leadership is just stop following all the things that people are telling you should do.
Mhm. Mhm. And then so once you stop following those things, then what's the solution for, or maybe it's not a solution, but what's the path for growth
Yeah.
that you outline for these women? What is what is leadership on your terms actually look like?
Yeah, so we have like a 3-part framework that is core to our programs. And the reason why we start with the unsubscribing from conventional leadership, the first module on our program is called Shed. And it's essentially looking at the messaging that you received about what it means to be successful, what it means to be a woman,
Mhm.
and how have you been following that? How have you decided not to follow that? And how do those decisions serve you?
Mhm.
Because if I'm following directions around something that's baked in patriarchy, I'm following it because it's working in some way, shape, or form. Like
Mhm.
let's honor what that's gotten you.
Right, right. Like I get a paycheck every month because
Yeah,
I toe the line at this
yeah.
one company.
It provides
Yeah.
stability.
Mhm.
In some ways it's clear because it's very, this is how you do it. And I don't have to like navigate with uncertainty. So Shed is actually looking at ways that you're colluding or choosing not to
Mhm.
collude with some of what has been represented as right leadership.
Mhm.
And then Reveal, the second module, really, now that we've cleared out the noise and brought some like conscious awareness to that and more choice to that, Reveal is about really getting reacquainted with dreaming, because part of what we're told is like, no, 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 not that.
Mhm.
Just be satisfied with what you have. Stability is great. Keep it locked down. So it's like refamiliarizing women with dreaming, understanding their values, and things that they really value, not that they told are important, in a leadership position. It's redefining the woman that they want to be in the world and getting really clear on that and declaring it. And then the third module, Shine, is actually creating that impact they want to have through big and small movements in groups celebrating one another. It's like, okay, so you just said this is the type of woman you want to be in the world. This is how you want to lead. How can you do that right now?
Mhm.
When you hang up from this call, what's an option for you so that you're just kind of building evidence for yourself that you can actually be that in the world and that that's great and enough and okay. And
Mhm. And that it also has its own positive feedback loop that you're getting them to tune into as well, instead of, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I'm doing it the way that is not prescribed by society,
yeah.
but actually doing what they want and then getting, I see, like this could work. This does work. It is working, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my own experience, when I was in corporate, we did like a big 360 analysis, the leadership circle profile, 360 profile for anybody who's familiar with that. There's a metric of courageous authenticity. And I scored in like the 98th percentile of anybody who had ever taken that test, because they tell you kind of where you are, which for me in a corporate environment wasn't a benefit. The company
Right.
did not want a courageously authentic woman navigating. I had a lot of issues with that. And
Yeah.
when only after, I got into coaching as a profession, I actually went back and spoke to the coach who facilitated that and said, that's not going away for me. Like, where was the conversation around how to actually use that and celebrate it and treat that as like an asset and navigate a career around that and all of those things? instead of just, that's not wanted here, and especially not from a woman. Like,
God, did they actually say that to you, or it was implied?
implied.
Yeah. Yeah. A loud implication, I'm sure.
But that's a really powerful question you just asked, because, you know, a lot of women come to our programs. It's like, well, they're not exactly saying this, right? But I can feel it. You know, part of the role a woman plays is navigating between the lines a little bit. And it's like all those things that you're sensing are like our small wonderings in you, those are actually valuable. You don't need it to be explicitly stated. You can actually trust that there's something about this that is true for you.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much of what you're teaching in this 3-step program, the reveal part, it sounds like part of it is tapping back into your intuition and listening to yourself, and like, what's coming up for you? What are these messages that you're getting? And I think part of this inculcated system that we live in, this patriarchy, is that we've been trained to not only ignore it, but just dismiss it. Like, oh, well, that doesn't really mean anything. You know, I'm going to focus on what's important and what's going to get me to that next place. Yeah. Yeah.
We have this really powerful exercise that we do in the program where we have women kind of review their life. And then later on, we're looking at, and peak moments, kind of things that stand out to you, places you want to really highlight. And then when we get into that messaging component, what are the messages you've received? How have you been doing that? When you compare those two things, the river, the peak moments, you're not following any of that messaging. Like, you can see how much you have to break from that in order to have the moments that are very consequential.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it seems like it's so helpful to have a group of women helping you take those steps, because doing it on your own is it's daunting.
Yeah.
It can be daunting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's permission to reinvite the parts of yourself that you may be saying, oh no, not here.
Yeah.
Like, or that you've even forgotten are important to you. It's like, no, those all have a place. Let's invite them back.
Yeah. So what's the biggest struggle that you see the women in your program have? Like, what keeps coming up all the time?
A feeling of stuckness. You know, we meet a lot of people in their career where it's like, I've kind of done what I've been told to do. I've got some success by like external financial metrics. Maybe I'm a promotion or two in. I've even chosen like a part of a path where I know what my functional job is going to be. And there's just this like, this is it. It's like this, what has this all been for? Is this really what I want? Just this like stuckness and like deep unknowingness. And really sitting with the parts of their imagination that have been completely
obliterated.
Washed away as a result of just kind of doing the next thing that's been on a pretty prescribed path. And really the uncertainty that comes from knowing you don't want to just follow that, but not knowing what.
Yeah. I've never worked in corporate, but I work with a lot of women who are in corporate, and I hear all kinds of stories all the time that I oftentimes I'm like, what? Like, really? Are you serious? And I think the thing that it's unclear to me because I've never walked that path. So the women that you work with, that they work to climb this ladder.
Yeah.
What do you think they're climbing towards? Like, what is that destination?
It's a really good question. There's kind of the realistic, like the way that it's represented is like higher title, more scope, more responsibility, a perceived autonomy that you get when you arrive at this level, where then I'll have the power to do this, or then I'll be able to do this. Like, kind of, there's the actual up, and then there's the thing that you make the up mean.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I think a lot of the meaning tied to upward is not having to deal with the things that I'm dealing with because I have more power and more autonomy and yeah, more stability, more sense of like, I've arrived, all of this has been for something. Like, I think that's the dream of the top, essentially.
Right. Right. And then they get there and they realize, oh, it's just different problems, maybe more complex problems, more stuff to solve, more people to manage, more time probably spent in the job as well.
And I think earlier we talked about that rule, everything is my responsibility. The need to expire some of those rules grows increasingly as you actually get into higher levels of your career. Like you cannot be a CEO taking responsibility for everything.
Right.
So there's like this kind of illusion that once I get there, then I won't take responsibility for everything. And there's actually this opportunity to play with putting down responsibility now so that you build that skill and comfort with that skill. So when you are the CEO, if that's what you want, like you've already broken through that, because that is literally not going to work when you're at that. Women we work with know a CEO who is taking on responsibility and how that feels when you're not the CEO. And it's like, you get to play with that now if you want to.
Yeah, that's so interesting to flip it like that. So cool.
Yeah.
So the women I work with, we talk a lot about confidence. This is generally kind of our continual conversation. Oh, how do I find more confidence? How do I show up with more confidence? And you've always appeared and felt like a very confident person. What's been your journey with confidence through your career?
I think confidence is such a necessary and juicy topic. One of the things that feels really important for me is I feel like we put a lot of desire to have confidence to do the specific thing. And confidence for me is actually about building trust to navigate whatever. So it's kind of like independent of a specific action and independent of a specific outcome. It's actually trusting that whatever comes, I can handle it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the way I talk about it too. I use the metaphor of going on a hike without a map and without a compass and just kind of like, okay, like, do you trust yourself to get down the mountain? Then great. If you don't, then maybe you need to build some tools or bring some tools along with you. Yeah. Yeah.
I think for me too, like a lot of female perfectionism, which is again, a patriarchal idea, is baked into this idea of confidence. I see a lot of women vocalize that they are not confident because they don't have one of 100 things they need. And that becomes, okay, well, I'm not confident. And confidence and not having done it get collapsed.
Yeah.
And those are not the same thing.
Right. Right.
So it feels really important to kind of create a dialogue around what parts of this are you confident about? Okay, so you've never spoken to this audience in this way around this thing. What have you done?
Yeah. 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 I hear that a lot when women say, oh, well, I want to have more confidence in meetings. And then we start talking about it and they say, oh, well, if I've had time to prepare, then I feel confident. And it's kind of like, yeah, but like, your stuff. You don't need to have a script per se. That's when the magic happens. And when you actually appear more confident is when you don't have a script and you're just working from this internal knowledge base and riffing a little bit.
Yeah.
If we're talking about speaking skills. Yeah.
Well, there's that tension of, well, if I just say it perfectly, or if I just package it perfectly, like confidence comes from like the perfect representation of it. And I think actually confidence comes from trusting that the dialogue can continue, trusting that it doesn't need to be perfect on the first go, trusting that like you can navigate the next step of it. It's actually not about the perfect first delivery. It's about, can I hold what comes up, and can I hold myself in what comes up? And that's a really different.
Yeah, Totally. And I think this also goes back to the idea of, oh, I am taking responsibility for everything. Well, in any communication, it is a two-way street, right? You're not holding the responsibility for the whole conversation. You're speaking to another person or an audience, and it should be designed as a ping pong game, so it's not boring for anyone.
Right.
And that's the biggest mistake I see with women in a communication skills aspect, is that they think that they have to perform in a perfect way, that they, if they've rehearsed enough, they can be confident on that stage or whatever microphone that they have. But actually, the confidence comes from allowing the audience to speak, or allowing the other person to answer a question, and then fielding that and doing that dance.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. What's the biggest lesson you've learned in how to communicate so people take you seriously? I mean, a lot of the women I work with, almost all of them, it's all about communication skills. Okay, how do I get my voice into the conversation in a meeting? How do I, speak with more confidence so people actually listen to me? What have you learned about that?
I think there's an interesting way that you phrase that question. For me, it can actually be a little disorienting to go into the conversation with the desired impact of being taken seriously.
Yeah, I agree.
Because a lot of times I'm in communication with people who are skeptical. And part of it is I have to let that skepticism exist, which feels counter to the being taken seriously. So for me, the reframe is like, how can I show up in a way that is enough of a nugget to keep this dialogue going?
Yeah. And how would you, like, if I were to say, well, how do you do that? What's your advice? What would you say to that?
I think the skill of listening is really important. And honestly, I think that this is innate in a lot of women. But it's like something that garners the person's attention or piques their interest. And that requires understanding who you're talking to, at least to some degree. So it's like being able to detach from what I think is most important, and to attach or to kind of get in the mind and heart of what's important to this person. And, a concrete, and building resonance from that. And a concrete example of that is something that was a hard earned lesson in my career, was like, I didn't get, when I was in conversations with the executive team at my company, like what they're focused on and what I'm focused on are really different things.
Right.
And I felt so desperate to get them to see what I was focused on. And that was never going to happen unless I could like think about what they're focused on.
Right.
And it felt so much like, well, this is really important. Why do you care about what I'm working on? Like, just that like, oh, it's so meaningless and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's not meaningless. It's just perspective.
Yeah. So how did you manage to, I mean, not be taken seriously, because we've already talked about that, but did you manage to shift your perspective then? Like, what happened once you came away with that nugget? Oh, they're never going to be concerned with this level, with where I am. Did you then shift your communication style from that?
Yeah. I mean, being able to tie the dots between what was happening for me and what they were focused on. And I think part of it was my struggle was thinking that it would happen at a snap of a finger. And it's actually a process. So giving myself the grace where like, this might not be one conversation or 3 conversations. This might take like 7 conversations, and being able to sit with my own discomfort of knowing I had something valuable that just hadn't translated yet. Something that I see is like, oh, it doesn't go good on the first try, or the connection's not made, or they don't see the value, or it's not clear, and then backing away. Versus still trusting like, actually, this is important. and I might not know totally how it links, but I'm in for, I don't want to call it a game, but like I'm in for the journey of determining how this does link and knowing that that's part of my role and responsibility. And like, it's gonna take more than one time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you and I are so similar in that we're impatient and we want to move fast. We want to get things done. And sitting, like you said, sitting with that discomfort is it's such a great skill to nurture, because not everything moves as fast as we want it to move. And we have to, again, like dance with this uncertainty a little bit. And there is, and I think that goes back to the conversation of confidence as well, dancing with that uncertainty, like being on the mountain and well, this isn't the right way. I know, because that path, I've never seen it before. And okay, well, I'm going to take this other way over here and see what happens. And just kind of soothing ourselves along the way. That's something that I've had to learn a lot, because I used to go into this freak out. Like, oh my God, I took the wrong turn and everything's terrible. It's never going to work. Instead of just kind of course correcting and being like, okay, sit down, take a drink of water, have a few nuts in your little pack, you'll be fine. And I think we're often waiting for someone else to do that soothing for us in the process, but we actually have to do it for ourselves. And that's why these groups, these women's groups, I run women's groups as well. They're so valuable because, I mean, number one, women are so good at it, nurturing each other, helping each other. And somehow we're kind of terrible at doing it for ourselves most of the time. Like, we're so great at nurturing everybody else, taking care of children, whatever. But if it's just us, we really struggle with that.
Well, I mean, part of the patriarchy's value of women is how we are with others.
Yeah.
So if they're not validating, or if we can't see it working for them, then it's unsettling to us.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah. I think, I had a coach many, many years ago have me read Braving the Wilderness by Brene Brown.
I haven't read that.
And part of the goal of that book is like, you have to be comfortable with the discomfort if you really want to do something substantial, different, revolutionary. It's like, you're going to be standing in the wilderness and no one is going to be there with you.
Right. Freak out.
Like, they're not going to come for a while. It's like, I hear women who want to like, build companies and stuff. It's like, well, then you have to be comfortable without anybody validating your idea for a long time. Like this is a lifelong skill of something important to develop, and it lives in reframing confidence.
Do a lot of the women in your programs, have you seen them go on to maybe even quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs, start their own things?
Not really, and that's not our market. I obviously believe in the path of entrepreneurship. I think it's great for a lot of reasons, and no one knows what's best for you. Like, there are also great reasons for staying in a more traditional corporate environment. And if that is something that works for you based on your life and your experiences, go for it.
Yeah. Nice. So I want to wrap it up with our last question, because we're almost out of time. So I always end with the same question. When you think of what it means to communicate confidence, what comes up for you?
A felt sense of like groundedness and trust in yourself. Like, I think that is like the starting point, and the communicating with confidence comes from there.
Yeah.
And there's that piece that we spoke about earlier, just like really getting clear about the expectations you're holding yourself for about confidence. Because my guess after working with women is it's mile high, and you're collapsing with not knowing everything, with not being confident. And those two things are not the same thing. Confidence does not require knowing everything.